in that much detail or not.
Okay. Yeah, so basically I have it broken down in a couple chapters, but let's start with, okay, talking about your family.
Okay.
Or I guess you just want to introduce yourself first?
Yes, I'm Mona Selby. Mona Scott Selby, I better put it like that. That was my maiden name.
Mm-hmm.
And I was from a family of 10. And the oldest one graduated from high school the year I was born. Then my dad had 3 produce houses before the crash came in 1929, and he and my uncle lost everything. But he was lucky enough to get a job with a feed company that gave him $150 a month, which was good then. And then they hired him to go back into another produce house and then he went from there to the as postmaster then, and he was that until he retired from that. My mother was one of the smartest people you'll ever know. She had a memory. Everybody in town would ask her if she when somebody's birthday was or when they were married and everything, and she could tell you that. Well, I always wondered what my mother would be in this day and age with that kind of smart. My dad always said she was much smarter than he was, and you know she was so smart. And but anyway, we did that, and all we kids had jobs from the time we were little. I started at 7, and my sister was 9, and we took papers till she was 13 and I was 11.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to deliver twice a day, and we had all of New Hampton. And so then after that, I went to, well, I worked at a drugstore, and then I worked at the grocery store, and then I worked at, it was a grocery store, dry goods combination, and my uncle ran it, and he was an undertaker, and this other girl and I helped him put the bodies in the coffin.
Really?
Uh-huh. I was scared to death of them until then. and she fixed their hair always. And then I graduated, and the day I graduated on Thursday, and I went to Kansas City to work on Sunday. And we
Graduated from high school?
Uh-huh. And then I went down there, and at first, well, the next day I got a job at the drugstore, but I went, and then I put my name in at the hiring place, and so I went to the Wilson's packing plant and worked in the spice room there. Not quite a year, and then my mom got sick, and so I came home to take care of her. And then
Was your dad still around too?
Yes, he stayed around a long time, and then she died, and I went up after she died. Well, I went back to Kansas City and started working for TWA, and I worked there a year, and then I'd put my application in for the FBI, and I got that, and I went out there then.
Out to D.C.
It took a while to get it because it was such a big family they had to investigate everybody as well as me. And but I worked for 4 agents out there. I'd get files for them, you know, and at that time our department was the secret department, and to get our checks cashed we had to go just across the street, it was the President's Bank, and that's the only place we could cash them.
Really?
And so we worked for these agents, and we were on the same floor and rode the same elevator with J. Edgar Hoover all the time.
Did you ever talk to him?
Yeah, he always very nice, and said, of course, he was always in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
And but our section, we had people overseas and down in South America. We were mainly for communists and the Nazis in the United States. And we had one guy that went to Mexico and was second in the Communist Party. He went down as a Standard Oil Company and pretended he went a communist, you know.
Oh, really?
And he was down there with that, and that's where our people worked all the time.
And what year was that you started down there?
Let's see, I went out there. I was out there in part of 42, 43, and 40. Came home in 44 after. We got to see both the surrender, you know, there in Washington, the surrender of the Japanese and the Europeans.
When you were in Washington?
Uh-huh.
And what was that like?
Oh, great, because, you know, everybody went on the street. In fact, Bobby lost her billfold twice, my sister-in-law that I lived with, and it was sent back to her each time.
Because somebody found it on the street and...
Yeah, and one of them came back from Miami. I guess somebody was up there, and then they found it and they sent it back there. But all the money was in it and everything. And the thing she was worried about was her FBI pass, but it came back too. And so yeah, we were out there that long, and it was a great time out there. We really loved it. Everybody was away from home, you know, so you'd sit down on the streetcar and say, "Where you from?" You know, like, and but. Then when the war was over, well, it was another thing I loved out there. They had all these homecoming parades for everybody. You know, we saw Eisenhower and all of them coming. They always had the big parades down right past our building.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. And on Pennsylvania Avenue. And then they would have the flyover too, and all the marching, you know, and everything. And then I saw Roosevelt's funeral. Yeah, I was out there when he died.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
And then out there when Truman took over?
Well, let's see. No, I wasn't there when he took. Well, yeah, I was, because, but it was shortly after that I came home, because, well, they didn't need all of us then. You know, Washington was full of girls because of the fact that, of course, all the servicemen came in, but it was. They had all these extra jobs and everything, you know, they had to do. And they had lots of Quonset huts and all set up for the girls to work in because they didn't have room for anybody. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. You know the circles there in Washington, D.C.?
Which ones?
All the circles.
Oh, like the roundabout areas?
Yeah, the DuPont Circle and all those. Well, when we'd come in, if we had a morning shift there at the office, why, we'd come in, and after a Saturday night and on Sunday, you know, and of course a lot of these guys didn't have money to stay at hotels. They'd sleep in these circles.
Really?
Uh-huh. It was safe enough to do that then.
That's funny.
And so I came home then, and I went right to work for the hospital then.
In Kansas City then?
No, in Bethany.
In Bethany?
Uh-huh. And I worked there about, well, until I got married then. I met Harold there. He was from Bethany, but I didn't never know him before. I knew some of his friends. So he just came back in February, and then we got married. And then after that, I was a half housewife and partially farmer, because we had the farm out the edge of town, and Harold worked with the highway, so he couldn't always get home to do the chores, so I'd do that and take the kids with me then as we went along. So that's pretty much it then. And then before my husband died, we bought into the Advisor, which is Shopper, and
the Bethany Advisor Shopper, the newspaper.
Yeah, just our Advisor, our paper,
right?
Not the newspaper. And so then when he died, he was just there 2 years, and and then my partner didn't like to work with a woman. He didn't think they were smart enough. And I knew all the time I was smarter than he was. But anyway, he wanted to buy me out and everything. But I went down and talked to my lawyer, and he said, "Wouldn't you like to stay?" And he said, "Well, buy the other. We just owned a quarter, so buy the other quarter." So I did, and then it came. That was in February. So in July, then he came over and he thought, well, one or the other ought to have it. So there's a little more to this, but I don't tell all of it. But anyway, he said, "I'll give you an either buy or sell." Well, he wrote all the contract, and I could have it at the same price we bought the other at. So I bought him out. Of course, he was mad about that. And so then right after I bought out, my brother, Verl, had a store in Arizona, and he burnt out. So he came back here, and then he went in with me too. And then I retired in '85, and I still have it. And that's pretty much my life then.
And then moved to Kansas City.
Moved to Kansas. Well, actually, my husband and I lived in Kansas City. He worked for the Veterans Department, and for about a year, and and of course I'd been here before, and then I moved back to Kansas City then. So I've been to Kansas City 3 different times now.
Oh, great.
So that's pretty much it.
Cool. I'm sure I've got some more. Let's see. So you said you had 10 brothers and sisters. Oh, what were your parents' full names,
Okay.
dates of birth, and where were they born?
Mary B. Solomon's my mother, and she was born in Martinsville, which is a little town just north of New Hampton. And her name was Mary B. Solomon, and she was born in 1884. And my dad's name was George Edward Scott, and he was born in 1882. And like I said a while ago, he was a produce man and all.
In Missouri?
And he moved. They moved from Virginia here when he was 2 years old.
And what was the reason for the move?
The parents they had one of them. They had an uncle. My grandmother did, that came first, and he liked it, and he said, there was lots to do and everything, and lots of ground to be settled and everything. So he came on, and he was a carpenter, but he was ambidextrous with both hands, so he was really a good one like that. And so he sent for them, and they came on here then. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of my family from West Virginia came after that.
So do you remember, like, your grandparents then, too?
I remember all my grandparents were dead by the time I was 8 years old.
So, and they would have been in Virginia, West Virginia, is that right?
Just Virginia, and then, but of course they were back here then. Two of mine died the year I was born, so I don't remember them at all. Then one grandfather died when I was 3, and the only thing I can remember, which is too bad, is seeing him in the coffin in our living room. That's where they used to do.
Really?
They bring him there. Yeah, cleared back to. Mom was laid out in the living room, but they had her funeral someplace else. And then my grandmother, which we loved, her name was Nancy Solomon, and she died when I was 8. But she was one of the little tell the jokes and everything, and we had a good time with her. Mm-hmm. But with so many kids, we were always having some kind of disease or something, like whooping cough or measles or something. When I had measles, 3 of us had them at the same time.
Really?
So she was busy. And when we had whooping cough, Dad had to go and stay with his sister because he couldn't come into the house. He'd come out and talk to us through the window.
Because he didn't want to get it?
No, yeah. And they wouldn't let him. We were quarantined. She was quarantined for 6 months in a row.
Wow.
For all that stuff. And finally, after the whooping cough and everybody else was getting it, they said, well, you might as well just come on out and go on home now because everybody's going to get it anyway.
That's funny.
And but it was hard on her, but she had to really work hard to get all that done. And I guess that's the main thing. And we traced back to, on my mother's side, on the Ross side, we traced back to Betsy Ross. And that'll be all in that other stuff you got.
And the genealogy packet that we're working on?
Yeah. And I guess that's pretty much it. We turned out my oldest brother went to college at MU for 2 years, and then, of course, they had to pay their own way. Dad couldn't afford to pay him, so he dropped out then, and he bought a produce house there in Chillicothe. My oldest sister, she had, the very oldest one died at 4, but the next one, Maxine, she had went to school. What she'd do is she'd go to school in the summertime, borrow to go to school in the summertime, and then she'd teach in the winter. You could do that then until she got through. And she taught in New Hampton, and then she ended up in Bethany teaching. And my next one, it was really during the Depression, and so she worked there for a family in Bethany, and then they took her with her to Des Moines and worked up there, and then she went to Florida with my aunt and uncle. And then Edwin went to junior college in Trenton, and then he ended up being vice president of the bank down at Independence, Kansas. Mm-hmm. And Verl went in the, well, he was in the Navy too. He during World War II, we had 3 of them in the Navy, and then Irwin was the one. He went clear through college, and in fact, during World War II, why they sent him to MIT.
Really?
And he was a oh, what am I thinking about? He would oh shoot, meteorologist. That's the way he started out. He took Marm's smartness. He really was smart as could be. Well, I say that we all of us finished up valedictorian or salutatorian, so we were pretty good.
All 10?
Yeah.
Wow.
And all 9 of us, because that one died.
Right.
But then anyway, and then Irwin, he would work games and all down there to make money to send himself to school. And then in the summertime, he worked at what they call the state farm. It was an agriculture experiment for the government, and he worked there in the summertime then. And
was that down in Jeff City then, or
no, that was in Bethany.
In Bethany, okay.
Well, then between Bethany and Albany, and I mean New Hampton and Albany. I'll get it. New Hampton and Bethany, and then he went into the service in World War II then, and was an officer, and then like I said, they sent him to MIT, and then he was one that he ended up helping writing the book for the meteorology farm, and then he was sent after the war, and he was working for the government. He was sent to see if the Middle East off of Egypt, to see if they were some of them were testing bombs, and he was over there on a ship to help record all that.
Really?
And then Verl, the next one, he was in the Navy. He went in at just barely 18. He was in 7 years, and then he came back, and he was he worked for my brother a while, and then he bought a store in Arizona then, and then it's down to we girls then. There were 3 girls then, and Francie worked for the in Jeff City for the government down there, and then she married Mac, who was an officer in the Army, and he was sent to Germany during the war, and then when he came back, he didn't marry till he got back, but he got back. But they had, she worked for a bank. After she was 40, and raised her kids, she worked in the bank and became vice president of the bank out there.
This was Francie, you said?
Oh,
really?
Mary Frances. And of course me, I told you about me. So, and Shirley, she was only 13 when my mother died. So my sister Kathleen took her in and helped raise her. And then she came down and went to business school. And then she worked for Internal Revenue for a while here, and then she started having her kids, and she had 5 boys. And so then she stayed home after that then. And that's all of them.
Great. And
Did that help you any?
Oh yeah, and then let's see, in terms of the war, I know you mentioned that, well, okay, so 3 of your brothers plus Harold were in it.
And then Shirley's husband was in, and Francie's husband were in.
And what were their, I guess, jobs during World War II?
Well, Irwin, I was telling you about him, and Verlin in the Navy, and he was a mechanical guy on the ship. He was on the USS Trenton. In fact, his ship was reported by these little submarines. You've heard about the little submarines that came in and spotted where all the ships were, the Japanese submarines.
Like U-boats? Oh, the Japanese ones?
And they captured one of the, it was two-man submarines, and they captured one of those there. And on their log, they reported that the Trenton was in Hawaii at the time, but they left a day before Pearl Harbor.
So he just avoided all of it then?
Yeah, well, he didn't avoid, but he avoided Pearl Harbor. But they went, and we didn't know where he was or anything. We knew he was supposed to be there. So when they went on to the Suez Canal, and he called us in from there to tell us that he was all right.
Mm-hmm.
And Irwin was on his, he was in the Air Force, and he was sent to New Guinea, and he was out there, and what he had to do, they had to decide whether they could take off and fly because of the weather, you know. That's what, they could stop the flight in case, you know, because of the weather. And then Mac was an engineer, Francie says was an engineer, and Ed was in the Navy, and he made warrant officer, and it was kind of odd. He was on a tanker, well, yeah, at first, and then, no, he was on an APA and a tanker before that, and then they were in the Coral Sea battle, and so was Verl. They were both there, but and they probably, refueled his ship. Well, it was one of them that did,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't know it. They were both
Till
there.
after the war.
After the war.
Really? Huh.
And then let's see that. And then Bill White, Shirley's husband, was in the Air Force, and I think he went in late enough. I think that he flew planes, but he would mainly shuttle them back over to the Philippines for them there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Fred had, the son had an interesting job with the Army. He was a finance man, and when they were in what's the one off of China? I can't think of names.
Japan? Or?
No, out to sea. It used to be part of China.
Oh, Thailand? Or Taiwan?
Yeah, Taiwan. They were stationed there, and they'd fly out of there, and they'd take payrolls.
And this is Fred, you said, right?
Yeah, to
right.
different countries. And one time they were off of the Philippines, and they were being attacked. So it was their orders to do it, and he shoved millions into the sea.
Mm-hmm.
He had to really report on that, and of course they had the numbers and everything of them, but he sure hated to do that. He said, and then of course Ken was in the service, and
and what for Grandpa? What did he do in World War II again?
He had a terrible time going across. He went to basic training in Leavenworth, and then he went to Leonard Wood, and he was supposed to go over with an oil engineering company, where they laid the pipelines for him and all.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was playing football, he got a spike through his ankle. Really, it didn't bother him that much, and then of course his eyes were terrible, so he had to wear glasses all the time. And so he went to the port of our embarkation to go overseas with this oil company, and they wouldn't take him with both. So even though it didn't bother him, so he had to go back to Leonard Wood. He did that 3 times before he was sent overseas, and then he went to the Adjutant General's office, and he was in Korea, and after they got settled, he was in the Philippines first, and they were going to the Philippines. They were on one of these, it's an APA, they hold the tanks as well as the men, They got in a typhoon, and one of those tanks broke loose. So he said nobody was scared because they knew we were going to drown. He said that but somehow or other they didn't. The big ramp that lets down,
Mm-hmm.
helped. They didn't think it would, but it did.
Wow.
And so he was there, and then they went up to, they sent him up to Korea, occupying for a while. And then he was in the reserve for 16 years after he got out.
So would you guys write letters a lot to each other then during the war too?
I didn't know him in NC.
Oh, that was before you knew him, because
Yes.
that was after.
Yeah, I didn't know him. And, but he was in school at the time, and he quit and decided to go to service because he was afraid. He was wanted in so bad he was afraid they'd run out of uniform. And but he was one of those that was like that he really wanted to go. And I think that's pretty much most of it then.
Okay.
And then on the other stuff, you can get from the geology stuff, and when they get that done now
Mm-hmm.
on both sides.
And then let's see. How about do you want to talk a little about the Depression too? Like, what was that like when you were growing up?
Of course, I was just 5 years old. Well, like I said, my father had these three in three different towns, these produce house, and they'd ship wool to Chicago all the time, whole train loads. Train cars of it, and then they had chickens. They'd buy chickens, and they'd take those to up to Chicago and to New York, and they had to ride with them, So my brother and a guy they'd hired would ride and feed the chickens and all on the way up there. And they even, I'll tell you one of the funniest ones, they even had rabbits. We bought rabbits, and by the time you shipped all those like that, the skin was coming off them, but they could take it up to Chicago and get rid of it just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, about how things were on that. Well, then they had things went so bad then that they lost their my uncle took bankruptcy, but my dad wouldn't do it. He said I'd give up anything before I'd take bankruptcy. So there was an old fellow up to Ridgeway that had money, and Dad talked to him, and he loaned him the money to pay off both debts.
Mm-hmm.
And that fellow always said to his son, he said, if George Cotta ever wants to borrow money, you give it to him. But Dad paid on that debt, and he didn't have much to pay, so it might have been $25 one month. But he paid on that till I was a sophomore in high school.
Really?
And I was 5 when that happened.
Wow.
And but it all turned out all right. And but you did without. I mean, we were fortunate. We lived in town, but it was right at the edge of town. That we had some grounds, and we had a fella farm it for us. But then we had our own chickens, our own cows, our own hogs, and everything. So didn't have to buy much. And but it's like. I can remember one time Katie took me down. I needed a pair of shoes. Of course, we had barefoot in the winter, in the summertime practically all.
Really?
And so she took me to buy a pair of shoes, and they were the red and white and brown and white. What do they call them now? Anyway, they've come back about 5 times since I had them.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I can remember they were $2.98. And that was a lot then for us at $2.98, And Francie and I, when we were taking papers in, if we had extras and anybody wanted to buy them, they were 5 cents a piece. But and that's what we made on each paper that we sold. So we clothed ourselves until I was in the 8th grade, and Dad brought my graduation day. Dress, and but it hurt everybody. You didn't have a lot of clothes. Mom was fortunate; was a wonderful seamstress, and so I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Florida, and they had a big house, and then they had a smaller house, and so they'd rent out that every winter to this couple from New York. And then when a couple from New York got ready to go home, she didn't want to take any of her clothes, so she asked my aunt, "Do you have any?" Body that could use it, and Aunt Fan would say yes. So then she'd fix all that stuff in a box and send it up to Mom, and Mom would make us our clothes out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one coat, but it was gabardine. It was like the London fogs are now, and best coat I ever owned.
Wow.
And Francie and I were about the same size then, so we'd switch back and forth, so it looked like you had more clothes. Because you didn't have very many. And then another thing, Dad, of course, was had been in the feed store, so we had turkey feed. There were huge sacks, and they were colored. They like print, and so he'd save all those, and Mom would match them and make us dresses out of those. It was better. It was better material than what you bought at the store, actually. Mm-hmm. And so that was part of what but you learn to save. I think that's the reason our generation now is better at you know what they do as because they watch their money and everything, and you don't get extravagant on and all because you lived through that where you didn't have the money to do it. I know when we took papers, we'd have loved to have a bicycle, but we couldn't afford it. So we just walked. But I remember Shirley, of course, she came along and everything was over. Dad was in the post office then, and so she got a bicycle right off the bat. Didn't even like it. I mean, didn't you know? She thought she did, but she didn't. She wouldn't hardly ride it. And we both said, "Boy, we sure wish we'd have had that papers." Because one was a long route with not as many papers, and then wasn't shorter round with lots of papers, and one of us could have taken that real good. But anyway, we did. We made it all right, and it took till well, let's see. I guess about 5 years for really to come out of it completely. You know that. But you never forgot those days when you had to really watch and didn't have anything. Of course, we always had enough to eat because we grew it, you know, and all. And then Mom, we didn't have a strawberry patch, but there was a neighbor had a huge one. So we could go up, we kids would go up, and we'd pick a box for a box. We didn't buy it. We'd pick them a box, and then we'd get a box for picking their box.
Okay.
And we did raspberries the same way. And then Mom would can them all, you know. And of course, we butchered and had our own meat, and so. We were pretty lucky on that because we did have plenty of food all the time. And it took a lot of food. And that's pretty much what I remember about the Depression then.
So did anyone, or I guess what did you guys think about Roosevelt at the time, and did anyone get jobs through?
We all liked him. We all liked him. I know, I'll have to tell you one thing. My mom was pretty much spoke out what she believed. And they were at church, and we had this one guy that was always, well, he was supposed to be a preacher, and he'd pray for hours, so they didn't like him to say the prayer. But anyway, they were in church or in Sunday school one day, and of course Mom had the 3 sons of the service, you know, and he said, well, they was talking about Roosevelt, just giving the devil, and Mom looked up and she said, you know, if I hated Roosevelt as bad as you do, I'd just go to some other country then. And she did tell him that. And but we lived right next door. Finally, when we moved on downtown to the Methodist church, and she always helped with the dinners that they had there. And she was always having to run over and get something they ran out of, like beans, green beans, canned ones, you know, and all. But we always had a cellar full. We had you probably heard cellars like the tornadoes now. Well, we always had a great big cellar, and she'd can enough, and like potatoes and carrots and Chinese cabbage and all this stuff we'd have down there, plus the canned goods, you know. So, and we went to cellar several times. And they always kept an axe down there for us to cut our way out, and of course a kerosene lamp to have that. And it had a little vent that you could get air out of, all right. And so we had that, and that was during that time too.
And so, did anyone get jobs through like all the programs Roosevelt was starting up?
I in fact, not my family, but my cousin. During that time, why they had what they called a CCC camp. I don't know whether you ever heard of them, but they went out and, well, they had a lot of different jobs. I know they built in the forest. They planted lots of trees and things like that. And each one of these, they had a camp for them, different places, and they drew not very much money, but they drew money. At least they had jobs that way. They put them to work through that. And WPA, that was another one that they had during Roosevelt's time, and they worked on roads and things like that, you know, on the old roads in town, but also on the highway, helped on that. And they built a lot of things, a lot of buildings and everything, every place. And so they liked his programs, all of them, and so we all liked him. And of course, Dad got his post office job through him.
Mm-hmm.
Dad had been a real good friend of Dick Duncan, who was a representative from our area.
At the federal level or the state level?
The federal level.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also was a very good friend of Truman's, President Truman. When he was just running for Senate, why he'd come up to New Hampton, and he knew Dad, so they'd come up there, and Dad and my brother would take them to the other towns to introduce them, and make him speeches and everything. So he was invited then to his Truman's
Inauguration?
Yeah, inauguration. I'll try to get it in a minute. And so he went.
Oh, your dad did?
Uh-huh. In fact, he went, and all the grandchildren had been boys, except the very first two. And so I was pregnant with Vic. And so he said, well, I'll tell you, if it's a boy, just send me a letter. If it's a girl, send me a telegram. So we sent him a telegram. Vic was born then. But he went out there. In fact, Dad looked so much like Truman that a lot of people would come up to him,
And think he was?
Yeah.
So did you get to meet him too then? Meet President Truman?
I went to several of Mom and I went with him, and to a lot of those speeches and everything, and to especially up in there. And then Dick Duncan, we went to St. Joe and met with him several times too.
And what did you think of him, of Truman?
Oh, we liked him.
Liked him a lot?
Oh yeah. He said exactly what he thought. You didn't have to stand in the way of what he thought.
Mm-hmm.
Like he said, the buck stops here, and boy, it did. I mean, if you didn't like something, you told him, and he'd let you know why he liked. Yeah, I thought he was a very honest man. And but Roosevelt too, we liked him, and we was for him, and he was doing a good job with everything, so we were for him. Some people didn't, I know, but we sure did.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad's family had been Democrats from the time they were way before his section was in Virginia. They'd always been Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
So we grew up there. My mom actually started out as a Republican. Her father was. But after she married and Dad got the post office, why she changed to the Democrat then.
Really?
Uh-huh.
That's neat.
He didn't ask her to. She just said, well, that's how you're going to make your money. Why? She said,
She's going to support it?
Uh-huh. So she did.
Well, neat. Okay, so how about after the war, like during like the 60s and 70s, what did you think of sort of like all the changes that were going on in terms of, like Woodstock or the Civil Rights Movement? And
well, the Civil Rights Movement, I was really for. I always thought that even though my dad came from Virginia and my ancestors had slaves and everything, I always thought that was wrong. I just don't think you treat a human being like that. You don't buy and sell them like that. I was always against that. And like Woodstock, I just thought that's a bunch of kids, that they hadn't settled down yet and all. And the same way, like, in San Francisco, all those kids, they love children, and everything. But it was just a thing, it wasn't bothering me, and we didn't have any of it up around there, so. No, that, and of course, by that time I had kids, and they weren't into that, so that was fine with me.
Mm-hmm. And there wasn't, in terms of the Civil Rights Movement, there weren't many like black people or minorities in Bethany, were there?
No, I'll have to tell you, well, when I first moved to Bethany, there was a black family there. In fact, they had a little black school up north of Bethany. And this one black family stayed after the rest of them left. And in fact, he ran the water plant all the time. Was in charge of that. And he had a little dive up that they called Princess, as was his name. It was right at the north edge of Bethany. And we weren't supposed to go there, but of course we did once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And they were nice. They were nice people. So I never let that bother me. And I'll have to tell you though how bad it was through there. My sister was teaching school in the country, and this was during that time, not civil rights, but before that, about a black person. And over at Maryville, they had a teacher was murdered. Now they never proved that this guy did it, but there was a black person coming through town, and they got him. This is terrible, but they got him and put him on top of that schoolhouse and burned him alive.
Whoa.
You never heard of that? Yeah.
That was in Maryville, you said?
Maryville, Missouri. Yeah, they did. A lot of people went to see it and everything. I wouldn't have gone on a bed, but anyway, they did. Of course, I was small anyway. But I know after that, Maxine, when she'd go to this little country school, why, she'd pick up one of the older boys down that went to school, you know, and because there were several grades in one grade, and he'd go in with her first and light the fire and everything to see if, you know, anybody like that was around. They were scared to death, everybody. But they never proved that he did this at all, say. They didn't have a trial or anything.
Man. So would you say racism was pretty big in, around Missouri then, at least?
Yeah, I'd say it was, yeah. Well, they were scared. They usually, in the northern part, they didn't have any, only there was a couple of three real nice ones like that. They didn't have any trouble with it, see. It was on the south that they had them. But, yeah, I always thought that was terrible. And to treat any human being like they treat people, like they treated the slaves, I thought was terrible. Like I said, even though our family had them on Dad's side,
but not on your mom's side, is that right?
No, they didn't, And, well, of course, Dad was from Virginia, his folks were, and now his mother and father never had them, but his grandfather owned quite a few and all.
And it was your dad's side that fought for the South in the Civil War,
and
your
my
mom's
for the North.
For the North, right?
Yeah. Yeah, my dad's side, on his mother's side, she had 8 brothers in the Civil War, and for the South.
Your mom's side?
No, my dad's side.
Oh, your dad's side?
It was his mother's on side. Now, there was 8 brothers in the Civil War, and they had, I said it's her. It was her father's sons. They had 22 children.
22 kids?
And by 2 wives. But the 8 of those boys went to the Civil War, and for Virginia, and 1 was killed and 1 was injured, and the rest made it back alive then. And they fought at Gettysburg.
Really?
And there's another thing. They may not need this on this, but anyway, I couldn't believe it, even up to the Civil War, that anybody would fight like the armies would fight then, especially like the South. You know, they'd just start in like that, and well, the Federals were too. I mean, the Union was too. You, instead of trying to hide or try to get, you know, in cover, you'd march right. Well, that one Battle of Gettysburg, they marched right up that hill, right into this that Union army.
Just stand and face each other.
And I can't. Still, to my mind, I can't find out. Of course, it had always been done that way. The English did it and all time, but no, I couldn't figure that out. But no, as far as the race part, I wouldn't have let something like that happen if I could have helped it at all.
So do you remember like the first time hearing about Martin Luther King and sort of what he was doing too?
Oh yeah, that all came through good. And I thought he was very good, and he really rallied the people, which was good. I felt sorry for them down there. I couldn't believe, like down there in Alabama, like they do, how they did with people, you know. But those blacks that are people that would ride the bus when they were supposed to, or go to school and everything, you know, I thought they were really heroes on there.
Okay, and then let's see. Okay, so a little bit more talking about like, I guess current events too, or you know, just I guess you know today's world. How would you, or what would you say is sort of like the biggest difference between sort of you know when you were when you were growing up versus you know when
just take cars for instance. We had a Model T Ford. That's what I learned to drive on.
Really?
It was a Model T Ford. And then kid that I went with had a Model A, and so I learned of that. Yeah, that's how I learned to drive. And then we got a Chevy then, and my dad would. Well, I'd set out in the car and I'd been on those two to learn, but my brother was going to, Erwin was going to teach me right. So he took me up, it was gear shift, you know, and so he took me up at the edge of town, and it was a big hill and a curve. And we started down at the bottom. He said, well, now go up this. And I started up fine and got in the middle. He said, well, stop here. And I said, I don't want to stop in the middle of this. And then, so he said, stop anyway. So I had to try to start from that with the gear shift and the clutch from there then. So, and he, first of all, he was one of these that knew all of the mechanics and everything. So he said, I want to tell you how the car works first. So I had to learn everything about how the car worked before I could drive. He wouldn't teach me until then. So that was a bit, that in the cars they have today, you know, all the automatic stuff and everything, and the door locks and everything, that's a great difference in that. And of course, planes are so much different now and everything. I can remember the little tiny planes. I went up, when I was in Kansas City working, I went up in one of the small planes. And of course, I worked for TWA, and that's what we did, was modify B-25s. We put the first nose gun in the B-25.
Really?
Yeah, they used them a lot against Japan, and they didn't have them in at first. And I know we had to test them there to see if that plexiglass on the front would hold a B-25 without peeling it back. Of course, the first ones, they peeled clear back. So they got that worked out so they could put that in the nose then. And that really surprised the Japanese, because they used to attack them that way, you know, and come down. Pardon me.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Hello? Yeah, we're here talking. Yeah, just a minute, your mom.
Hi, Mama. For tomorrow? 3:15. Yeah, I could do 3:15. Okay. Okay, bye. She wants to clean my teeth at 3:15.
Before you go.
Yep.
But you know, there are so much changes. Like I said, I can remember that, and I was trying to think what else. But
do you remember like the first time you used a computer too?
Oh yeah, it was at the office. It's the first time I'd ever seen one.
The FBI office, or?
No. When we bought into when we went in the 75s when it was. In fact, I went in there that day, and at that time, like for a headliner, we had the deal that you dialed around and the letters, and that printed out your headlines.
Really?
And then when we went to a regular computer, after Verl and I went in, why, my headlines would come out on a strip, and I didn't have any screen to see it at all. I just had to imagine with my keys that I was doing right, and then come out in a strip, and you had to cut that strip and paste it where it went on the paper then. And then of course it went from there then on to everything, and now we print everything there and send it down by well, what do they call it?
Like email or?
To be printed.
Okay.
It sends down right on the computer, you know, to them.
Okay, sure.
To be printed. And that we just started that not very long ago. So see, that's quite a difference.
Man, no kidding.
Well, and for our little classified ads, we had two machines, and you type them on one, and this other one would print it and come out on a tape. And you'd cut that and put them in.
Man, and now there's internet and on phones and
oh yeah,
everything too.
But no, that old computer. Well, we bought it, but you'd sit there and type that, you know, type off your copy and everything, and all the headlines, but I couldn't see anything I was typing. So if you made a mistake, you didn't know it, but you could always cut them out, you know, and then put the letter in.
Like manually go through and cut?
Oh yeah, we cut and pasted all the time. That's what we did.
That's funny.
And our ads, you had to, like you'd have the form of the ad itself, and then you'd have to put the headlines on with that, and then you put it on a backing, and then that backing it would be the whole ad that you put in then.
Really?
Uh-huh. And used to, we had to paste up like a 2-page Hy-Vee ad, you know. We had to do everything by hand on it, you know. We'd type it up, and then you had to place them in by hand. Now, you could do the whole 2 pages on the computer and send it on down then.
Man, that's crazy.
So that really is a lot of difference.
Well, neat. And then, let's see. Okay, and then just, I guess, sort of the last thing, just a couple general questions too. What, I've got this one off the internet. What would you say are some of like the things you're most grateful for in life, sort of looking back at, you know, everything?
Well, I think that would be my husband and the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody turned out fine and everything, and Harold was a great husband. We had 30 years together, and I couldn't have asked for anything better.
And if you had to say, I guess, like, what would you say are some of the most sort of important life lessons you've learned along the way?
Well, I'll tell you this is what I've always said. You never take a job of any kind or do anything but what you learn from it. I always said, no matter how menial my job was, I always learned. Like even taking papers, I learned to count money back all the time because we had to collect, you know, and I was just 7 years old, but I could count. I learned to count that money back to them.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Mom had been a teacher, so she taught us all that to start with, but to do it to another person, you know, and how to start, like you start with what they've done, then you count it out. They don't count them. Now that's another great big difference, you know. You always counted their money back to them. You know, you kept, like, if you had a $5 and their bill was $3.98 or something, you'd start with $3.98 and then you'd count back until you got to that $5.
Mm-hmm.
And you never put the money up until you knew it was right.
Mm-hmm.
And so just things like that, or, you know, and anything, of course, when my mom died, that was really a big thing to us. Of course, I had just graduated. Well, she died just after I graduated. And, well, no, she died the next year because I went to Kansas City for that year. And, well, I don't know any great thing. And the war, I suppose, had as much change as anything, you know, with me going to Washington and all that. And I don't know any really big deal, but I always did, and I always told the kids this. I said, if you go out into this world, you treat people like you want to be treated. And I always told my girls at work, I said, I won't ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do and can do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just things like that I learned along the way that you go.
Mm-hmm.
So, but nothing big really, except the war, was a great big that changed.
And let's see. So, and if you had any advice for sort of future generations of Selbys, or, you know, anything you'd like to say to them, what would it be?
Be yourself, and try to do like you were raised to do, raised to be.
Oh, great.
And I'd say that to all of you. You know, just go ahead and be yourself. And you know, another thing I'll have to tell you, I always thought when I was in Washington, D.C., that no matter what I did, I'd try to do right, because I would think, I know my folks wouldn't know it, but if it ever came out about something, I wouldn't want to disgrace them. And that always was in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm. And
so I think that'd be advice to everybody, you know.
And is there anything else that I've left out that you'd want to touch on too?
Oh, I don't think so. I think that's pretty much, you touched on about
Pretty
everything.
good?
I hope it comes out all right for you.
I think so too, yeah. I've got it recording on there and then on here too. So I should have 2 copies of it. And let me see if I missed any other questions. I think I hit most all of them. Okay, well, great. So any other last minute thanks?
No, I was just thinking, like I said, when the FBI, they came and would, I gave them people to recommend to them to go see,
Right.
and they never saw any of those. They went to everybody else, like stores and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and went to high school and things like that. And I didn't know that until later, but they did. And to find out about you, what you've done, if you really did these things you're telling them,
Right.
which I don't know whether they do that anymore. But
I think they do, because I remember my econ professor said that they'd come talking to her,
yeah,
even saying like, "Do you remember the student from class, and how was he?" And
yeah. Well, they will. That's it. And you have to try to remember that too, because, and I always told the kids, I always said, watch about getting into trouble, because I said that follows you. If you do, that follows you all the rest of your life. I mean, really trouble, of everything. And my mom always used to say, especially on the girls, your reputation is all you have.
mm-hmm. Oh, great.
So that's just some sayings that they did.
All right. Well, perfect. I think I had an hour of film time on here.
Oh,
We're at
did ya?
56 minutes, so it worked out perfectly.
Probably gonna have to cut some of it.
Yeah, this will be great though. Let's see. 5:56.
Give you some idea of what it was like,
And then what was? Oh, one other thing. Okay, so growing up, I remember when I was looking up all the Jerry Litton stuff. He said he was born in a house without electricity and plumbing. Would that have been the same with you?
well, we always had electricity. As far as when I was born, we had this big house, and this old lady that had owned it had electricity in it then, and I was born there. It was a big house, two huge stories, and but we had a little radio too, and but we heated with what they all called a hard coal burner. It was a big round stove that had isinglass for windows in it. You could see it, the burn and all.
Mm-hmm.
And we heated that whole house like that. Of course, they had registers above that some of the heat would go up through that, and all. But it was cold. I know we had to get up 4:30 to meet our papers, and to get out in the morning. At that time of morning, and to keep warm. You didn't have electric blankets or anything like that. Why, we had feather beds. And instead of mattress, you'd have feather beds, and that they sunk down in, and then you'd pile the covers on. There you go. And then on the really cold ones, especially with us taking papers, Mom would bring hot irons up and wrap it in blankets and put them at our feet then.
Okay. So, and would you have been born in your house then, or in a hospital, or?
No, all of us were born in the house.
In the house?
Yeah.
So would a nurse come over then, or?
No.
Just
Mom
family?
Just family. Her sister, she had 3 sisters there, and one of them could always come and help then.
Mm-hmm.
But,
All right, well, I think we're out of time here. Let's see. Yeah. I want to make sure I don't start erasing my other stuff on here.
okay.